Hi guys, in this video I go over basic if conditions. I briefly go over the different comparison operators, and then I go over specific examples. I demonstrate how to compare integers, how to compare characters, and how to check Boolean variables. If you are interested in more complex if conditions such as if-else or if-else-if, please check out one of my other videos. I put a link in the description below. Let's go over the different comparison operators. So the first operator is less than another value. Then we have less than or equal to. And then we have the equal to or equality operator. Note that this is not a single equal sign. The single equal sign means assignment. This is two equal signs. This is very important when you get started, that a single equal sign is assignment, two equal sign is comparison. Then we have the not equal sign with an exclamation mark and single equal sign. And then we have greater than or equal to and the greater than sign. So most of them you're probably familiar with. The important ones is, again, the double equal sign and the exclamation mark equal for not equal to. If we want to check two values are the same, or if we want to check two values are not the same. Let's start out with the first example. And here we compare integers. I create a variable of type scanner, and I initialize it to a new scanner object that reads from system.in. I import the scanner class, and next I output a prompt that prompts the user to enter a number. I read in that number into a variable named num. So this now holds the value whatever was entered. Now I want to use a condition and check if that value is negative. So in Java, conditions start out with the if keyword following parentheses, and after the parentheses a code block. Inside the parentheses is always a condition, and that condition evaluates to true or false. If it is true, the statements inside the then block, inside the code block here, will be executed. If the condition evaluates to false, it will skip the block and continue with the statements after the block. Now sometimes you also see that there's an if condition without a code block defined, and there's a single statement after that. That simply means if this condition is true, it will execute the statement. If this condition is false, it simply will skip the next statement. Now Java doesn't really care about white space, so in theory you could have something like this. And if the condition here, whatever the condition is true, it will execute this statement. If it's false, it simply skips the very next statement. So it's always a very good habit to always define the code block, regardless if you have a single statement or multiple statements. Let's go back to the specific examples. In this case, I want to check if num is negative. So I do is num less than 0. And if it is less than 0, I output a message that num is negative. And I put a statement afterwards that simply outputs processing. So this could be any statements that come after. Let's run this code and enter a positive value, for example 5. We can now see it skips the statement inside the code block and just skips over it and outputs processing. Now if I enter a negative value, for example -8, the condition evaluates to true, it is negative, and then it enters the code block and executes the statement here. So to demonstrate it, if I don't have a code block, it would still work exactly the same. A negative value would still output the very first statement. Even if I don't have any spacing, if I'm a bad programmer and don't follow the proper indentation, it would still properly output it. Now this is really bad because this makes reading the code very difficult. So again, always good to follow indentation and define the code block. Let's continue with another example for characters. Now I output a prompt into a character, and then I declare a character named C and use scanner. Now unfortunately there's no next character, so what I will do here is do it a little bit hacky. I read the next line, and on the next line I read the very first character. Now, if you know a little bit about the scanner object, when we do next int up here, it actually read the integer, but it didn't read the line break, and I hit enter key. So I don't want this to read the enter key here. So all I'm gonna do is just read a next line up here. And what this will do is when I enter a digit, it simply skips the line break, and then I can read the entire new line here. Now it's okay if it's basically we can now read in a single character. Now let's use a condition and check if that character is lowercase a. I use C equal to A. And you should remember from my other video on data types, characters always use single quotes. So it's important that I don't just do A, especially if I have a variable named A, this would simply compare the values in those variables. So I want to be sure I use single quote A. And now I output C is a lowercase a. And after that block, I simply output processing 2 so that we can see if the code was skipped. Now let's run this again. I output -4. This will enter the code block up here, processing, and now it prompts me for a new character. Now let's output or enter lowercase d. This skipped the statement here. It skipped the block, so the condition was not true. Let's do it again. Let's enter lowercase a. Now we can see the then block is entered. It executes it and continues processing. Now what's important is when with characters, what happens if I want to check a specific digit in the character. Let's say I want to check if C is 6. This works. So this compiles. And say I enter now the character 6. This skipped the block. We can see I entered 6 and it straight went to processing 2. Why did it skip the code block? Now you may have guessed it. It is because I did not add the single quotes. So every character in Java has an encoding, an integer encoding, and it simply checked that encoding, but it didn't check the surface character. So if I want to check the actual character, I have to use single quotes. So if I run this again, and now for the character, I enter 6. This will work. It properly checks now if the character is 6. Now the last thing I want to cover is Booleans. So for this, I don't read in anything. Let's just declare a variable and say I have a variable isHappy equal true. And now I want to check what the value is. a lot of times when starting out with programming is that we have is happy equal true. And then we output some value or execute some statements. And here again, I output something processing 3, just so we can see this. Now when I run this, and I just enter 0 for the first prompt, I can see it outputs happy. Happy is true. It reads the value happy, compares. If it is true, that is true, and then it enters it. Now, this is very common for new programmers, but we don't really need to do this, because when we have a condition, we know that condition evaluates to true or false, such as the one up here. When we compare two values, it compares and then evaluates to true, or the one up here. When we have already a Boolean value, we already have true or false. There's no need to compare the value here. In this case, what we are really doing is taking the value in is happy, which is true, and checking if true really equals true or not. We can get rid of this. We don't need to compare. We can simply say use happy, is happy, it is true. If it's basically, if the value here is true, it will execute it. If it's not true, it doesn't execute it. So if we run this, we should still get happy as output because happy is true. Now if I change this to false, it will not work because the expression here is false. So we can see it skipped it because it was false. So there's no need to compare to either true or compare to false. We can always leave this out. Now what if I want to output it, that it's not happy? I could do it equal false, but there's a better way. We can use the single not operator. So we add an exclamation mark in front, which means not, and if it's not happy, then we output it. So let's add 0, 0 to ignore those two, and then we can see this one is false, and when it's false, it outputs not happy. So whenever you have Boolean variables, simply use the Boolean variable, the face value that is stored in it, or use the not operator, the logical not operator in front of it if you want to check if it's false. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.